Hello, my name is John Curiel with the newest segment on Campus Connection, Polar Politics. The U.S. presidential election is several weeks away with many important issues to be decided by this election. Polar Politics invites students of opposing ideologies to discuss their views on the major issues of the day. With me today are Robert Rowe from the College Republicans and Robert Fernandez from the College Democrats. Today we will discuss the role of government in combating recessions. Let's get right into it. Robert Fernandez, we'll start with you.
All right, thanks, John. The problem our economy is facing today is really we're stuck in a rut because there are 12.5 million unemployed Americans. They don't have jobs, they don't have disposable income, they're not out there spending money and creating demand. Because they're not doing that, businesses are seeing no increase in customers, they have no reason to expand, no reason to invest, no reason to hire new people. So they're not hiring, so those 12.5 million Americans don't have jobs, so they're not spending money. On it goes. What we need to do is what we did in the 30s, invest in infrastructure, put these Americans to work building roads, bridges, and highways to create infrastructure that will pay off in the future, put these Americans back to work so they have disposable income so we can put our economy back on top like we did in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s.
Okay, and then Rob, what is your view?
Well, I couldn't agree more. The economy is in a rut. We've had the longest streak of unemployment above 8% since the Great Depression. And in order to get out of this, I think what we should do, instead of focusing on short-term demand increases, focus on long-term structural reforms that will make it easier for businesses to expand and hire. There are always businesses looking to expand, go into some new line of work or expand in a different geographic region. And if we lower taxes, make the tax rate flat, and decrease regulations, I feel as though we could get businesses to do that and create jobs, which will in turn create demand.
Okay, so Robert Fernandez, what is your take on that?
I would obviously completely disagree. The first problem with what you're saying, that we need to lower the tax rate, marginal tax rates right now are the lowest they've been in 65 years.
Although we do have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world, and that is
I was going to get to that in a second.
Problem.
My point is this. The tax rate right now is the lowest it's been in 65 years. If what you say is true, we should be drowning in jobs, but we're not. Because tax cuts don't create jobs. Consumer demand creates jobs. If there's no consumer demand, there are going to be no jobs no matter how low the tax rate is. So we need to spend money, we need to put unemployed Americans to work if we want to see any change in our economy.
I'll agree with you that tax cuts don't create jobs. But what tax cuts do is to create the environment where businesses can expand and create jobs. And going along with long-term tax reductions will create an environment of certainty for businesses. Instead of doing 1 or 2 year quick demand stimulants that all do is draw from the future for the convenience of the present, what you do is create a long-term confidence in business so they can expand. Because businesses look at expanding and creating jobs. They don't look at the next 2 years or so. They look to the future, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And by doing 1 or 2 year small programs, you're creating more uncertainty because businesses don't know what happens after 2 years.
That is a wonderful rhetoric, but there are no facts to back it up. If you look at the reports issued by institutions like the Congressional Research Service, like the International Monetary Fund, like Moody's Economic Analysis Bureau, they all conclude the same thing. Tax cuts, austerity programs, things like that simply do not work in the real world. There's no correlation between the tax rate and the unemployment rate going back to World War II. It's simple, basic economics. Every major economic bureau in the world pretty much agrees with it. I'm sorry, but there's no evidence to support your position.
Was the 1980s the real world? 1980s, Ronald Reagan cut marginal tax rates from
Ronald Reagan actually raised the overall tax rate.
Marginal tax rates is what matters. Marginal tax rates is a tax rate on business expansion.
Look,
and when you tax business expansion, you're going to get less of it. And without business expansion, you can't have jobs. It's that simple.
It's simply not true. The marginal tax rate's the top rate. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Yep. If you look at the 1950s, the top marginal tax rate was 90%, and we saw the greatest period of economic growth in American history.
Now, if you'll let me butt in for a little second. Now, let's go back, though, for a moment to January of 2009. That was when President Obama first took office. That was when the recession was at one of its worst points. That was when we had the highest rate of job loss. So what would you have done to stimulate the economy, to stop the recession? Rob, we'll start with you.
Well, the first thing you do when you're in that deep of a hole is you stop digging. You stop creating new onerous regulations on business. That's the first thing you got to stop doing. Because believe it or not, those regulations cost money. And the more money corporations spend on complying with those regulations, the less money they have to invest in themselves and expand. Second of all, you create a long-term structural change that will give businesses confidence and ability to plan for years in the future. You don't do something short-term that businesses don't know what will happen, as we're seeing in the fiscal cliff that we're going to face in January 1. Businesses don't know what to expect after that. How can they plan for the future, plan for their future careers, their future employment prospects? They don't know what will happen come January. That's just not right.
Okay, Robert?
When you talk about coming out of a recession, the most important thing to look at is the multiplier effect. What effect does $1 of government activity have on our GDP? For what Rob is saying, for things like deregulation, cutting taxes, the multiplier effect is somewhere between 0.3 and 1. So that means for $1 of government activity, whether it's cutting taxes or deregulation, you get somewhere between 30 cents and $1 of economic activity out of it. For infrastructure spending, the multiplier effect is 1.5. So for $1 of economic activity, or government spending, you get $1.50 of economic activity out of it. That's what we should focus on. We should have spent at least $1 trillion on infrastructure. Bridges, rails, power plants, highways, rebuild our power grid from the ground up, would have created between $1.5 to $2 trillion in GDP growth, would have put those Americans back to work. We wouldn't still be in a recession if we had spent the money 4 years ago, like we should spend it now.
It's interesting that you mentioned the well, first of all, let's go back to those reports. I can point to reports that show money invested through tax cuts is more effective than money invested through government.
What reports specifically? Name them, cite them, who published them?
First of all, Art Laffer has been a very, very, very strong publisher on this, and so, and among others.
Art
in addition
Laffer.
to that,
and what bureau does he work for? What institution? What are his credentials?
He's a professor.
He's a professor at which university?
No. Yale.
Okay, well then,
to the best of my knowledge. Anyway, beyond that, it's interesting you mentioned the $1 trillion. We spent $1 trillion. The stimulus package, when interest is included in it and other programs that were passed alongside it, it came to $1 trillion. And we still have unemployment of 8.
I'm sorry, but you can't count interest.
It's still government spending, is it not?
No,
it's still government spending.
Look, on top of that, I'm sorry, but the stimulus package was
so.
also not $1 trillion in spending. It was $1 trillion in tax cuts, replacement aid grants to the state, and about $300 billion in direct infrastructure spending.
I'm
saying we should have spent $1 trillion straight on our infrastructure with no tax cuts, nothing like that. Spend $1 trillion. Get that $1.5 trillion in economic activity.
And it's interesting that you say we didn't spend $1 trillion when $1 trillion came out of the federal treasury. In addition, the tax cuts you cite aren't real tax cuts. They're temporary measures that create uncertainty in the business environment.
It doesn't matter what they are because the multiplier effect isn't there. Tax cuts don't give you a fair return on your investment.
Then why did the government do it?
Because the Republicans in this country don't believe in basic economics. They don't believe
Barack Obama controlled the presidency. The Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. He had anything he wanted.
Okay, we have 1 minute left now. So would you like to give your closing statements, Rob?
Well, if I take away anything from this, it's that businesses need certainty in order to create jobs and expand. A business expansion is what creates jobs. When you change the long-term fundamental incentive effects of creating jobs, businesses will create jobs. There's always a business out there looking to expand. Always an entrepreneur out there looking to start their own business and make a better life for themselves. And when you do that, when you reduce taxes, you encourage those things to happen.
Robert?
What we really have to do here is we have to look at the facts. The simple fact of the matter is every major economic bureau on this planet, the Congressional Research Service, Moody's Economics Bureau, the International Monetary Fund, all the big names, all the heavy hitters say the same thing. Tax cuts don't create jobs. Austerity programs don't create jobs. Conservative economics doesn't work. If we look at history, we see that infrastructure spending creates jobs. It invests in our future. It's what we did in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. It made us the greatest economy on the planet, and we can do it again today, and we should do it again today.
Now, that's all the time we have today. So that does it for our first segment of Polar Politics. Join us next week as we talk about healthcare reform. Campus Connection continues after the break.